Hello and welcome to episode 10 of What's Tom Reading? I'm Tom, and today I'm talking about the nonfiction expose called The Gray Lady Winked, How the New York Times Misreporting, Distortions, and Fabrications Radically Alter History by Mr. Ashley Rindsberg. The title of this book really says it all, but I was genuinely shocked by some of the things I learned while reading this. I think you probably will be too. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the show. All right, so today, as I said, I'm talking about the book The Gray Lady Winked, and just so you know, the Gray Lady is in reference to the New York Times. I guess that's what they call themselves sometimes internally, maybe externally too. I've never heard them called that before reading this book, but anyways, I guess that's what they're called. So I've been meaning to pick up this book for a while now, and I finally got around to it. And so you guys know how it works. I keep a list of books that I have to, or that I plan to read, and then I work my way through that list, generally in order. So if you have gotten me a book as a gift or given me a recommendation on a book to read, and it was a while ago and it hasn't turned up on the show yet, I apologize. It's not that I am not taking your recommendation or that I'm not planning on reading your book or that I don't like the book that you got me. It's just that I have to work through the other books at the top of my list before I get to it. And I generally keep a fairly long list, but I'm moving through it very quickly, right? So this book, The Gray Lady Winked, has been on my list for quite a long time now, and I have been really, really looking forward to it. I've heard the author on a number of different podcasts where he was talking to the hosts, basically plugging his book, and some of the stories that he referenced while on those shows were almost too wild to believe. But now that I've read the book, I've got to tell you, that wasn't even the worst of it. I guess maybe, okay, let's start with a little bit about the author, as we normally do. So we'll head on over to his Wikipedia page here. His name is Ashley, the man version of the name Ashley, I guess. Ashley Rindsberg is an American novelist, media commentator, essayist, and journalist. He's based in Israel. This book that he wrote is an investigation of the New York Times. He was born in South Africa, raised in Philadelphia, Las Vegas, San Diego. He attended Cornell University, where he majored in poli-sci, but don't hold that against him, either the Cornell or the poli-sci. He seems like a really all right guy. At Cornell, he worked on the history of recent science and technology program, and he was working on something to digitize paper archives. So yeah, it sounds like not the most exciting undergrad experience, but basically he ended up, actually, you know what? Let's do a disclaimer. I have to say this right off the bat, before we go any further, that I am well aware that the author, Mr. Rinsberg, may have undisclosed biases that compel him to want to attack the New York Times. I don't know what those are. He doesn't come out and say, I have undisclosed biases. Here are they. Well, now they are disclosed biases. But I went into this book kind of with my eyes wide open to that possibility. Generally, if you read a book where the intention is to target a specific subject in a negative and portray that subject in a negative light, you kind of assume that there's going to be some smearing. There's going to be some, I guess, maybe underhanded tactics, right? So that said, so be aware of that, right? If you pick up this book, be aware there might be some biases. He doesn't really seem super biased to me, to be honest. And I'm fairly sensitive to that sort of thing. Like I really, really don't like when authors try to sell me on something that I don't find believable. So maybe if we just agree, as we're talking about this book, that we want to take him at his word in good faith. And here's kind of the story about what drove him to write this book. So basically, he was doing some research kind of on this paper archives thing, this super fascinating poli-sci paper archives project that he was working on. And he says that he stumbled upon a story that the New York Times had published that referenced Poland invading Germany, and Germany, poor, sweet, innocent Nazi Germany, fighting back against the dreadful Poles. And he thought that there's no way that they actually published this. And it turned out, once he started digging, that the New York Times got just a lot of things wrong about World War II. Not just factually incorrect or like a mistake or like, the fog of war or whatever, but like the exact wrong thing, like the exact opposite of the truth on multiple occasions. And so he started to look into this, and he went through kind of the Times history, kind of looking at their handling of different kind of monumental historical events. And he was like, wow, they do this a lot. And not only do they do this a lot, they kind of seem to have a pattern in the tactics that they use and the angle that they like to portray. And so the New York Times, for those of you who aren't big newsies or whatever, they're kind of like the gold standard. They're the paper of record. It's what it's called. So like the New York Times is basically the biggest newspaper in the United States, certainly. And they're kind of say their tagline, right, is all the news that's fit to print. My opinion on that tagline has changed recently to all the news that might be fit to be used as toilet paper. But that said, historically, people have a lot of respect for the New York Times as kind of this institution that is this grand old institution that's very respectworthy, very respectable. They have some of the best investigative reporters, winning tons and tons of Pulitzer Prizes. Everybody reads the New York Times, blah, 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 blah. The big deal, big paper. And so as this guy, Mr. Rinsberg, is uncovering all these kind of crazy stories that the New York Times has published, he starts to put together a book, and he starts writing it, and then he starts to pitch it to different publishers, and they're all like, oh wow, that's crazy, oh wow, that's amazing, whoa, what an intense and really cool idea for a book, but yeah, no, we're 100% not going to publish that. And he's like, well, why? And they're like, yeah, that should be obvious, buddy, right? Like, we're not going to cross horns with the New York Times. They are the big dog, and we don't want to go to war with the Times over, your little book. And yeah, maybe they got some things wrong. And yeah, maybe there's some prejudice and some bias and some misdirection and some distortion and some overt manipulation of the American public. But, we don't really want to have a fight with the New York Times, so we're going to stay away from it. So this guy, he kind of sits on this book, and he's kind of a chicken at first. And I don't blame him, right? Because, he's just fresh out of college, doesn't want to immediately start off by being blacklisted by every institution, powerful institution in the country. And so he kind of sits on it for a while, and I guess it just keeps nagging at him over about a decade or so. And finally he's like, I'm just going to do it. He tries to get it published. He can't get it published anywhere. So he self-publishes it. And then I think now that it has been out for a while and it's selling well and people are picking it up, and the New York Times is like, meh about it. It seems like now some of the publishers are starting to find their courage, take that for what you will. The publishers tend to be slimy cowards as well. But they're finding their courage and starting to pick up this book, and people are starting to talk about it again. You might not have heard of it. I think you probably will at some point. This is a big deal, and I highly encourage you to go out and pick it up. And as always, there will be a link in the description for you to go out and pick up the book. If you buy it through that link, then I will get a few pennies from Amazon for sending you to that link. That will be very nice. That will help out the podcast a lot. I really appreciate you guys' support. Thank you very much. Anyways, back to the story here. So he publishes this book, and in fact, let's just jump into some of their crazier stories, right? So one, he kind of starts around the World War II era, where he really was, where he kind of jumped on to the idea of what the Times was doing. And he starts out with some of the New York Times coverage of Adolf Hitler, who you may know from being like the evilest person who ever lived, right? Probably. I don't know. I don't know if they have award ceremonies for something like that. But anyways, he's at least top 5 most evil people, right? So, anyways, the New York Times pretty early on in their coverage of Hitler, at least before World War II really gets up into full swing, says that, yeah, his rhetoric is fiery, and we think that he's, using anti-Semitic language to like rile up his base, but no, he's probably just a misunderstood guy, and he's actually probably not that bad of a guy. Turns out, you might think that he is, and it might seem like he is from the outside because of his overt, threatening, evil stances. But no, he's just really, really passionate about Germany. One thing about Hitler, according to the New York Times, is that he just really, really, really likes him some Germany. And he just wishes that everyone else would be cool about Germany too. And he thinks that the Jews are vermin and that they should be exterminated, but they don't think he's actually going to do that. And so they tell their readers just the same thing. Like, he's just fired up about Germany. Just a regular old guy like you and me who just really likes Germany a lot. And he talks big about the Jews, but nothing's going to happen with that. Okay. Anyways, as things are going, you go through like the period of appeasement, right? Where the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain was his name, goes and appeases Hitler for the Sudetenland. The Nazis take over that land. And Neville Chamberlain's like, okay, we've appeased you. We have peace in our time. Just don't do it again. Okay, Mr. Hitler. And Hitler's like, I promise I definitely won't. I'm a good guy. Just read this New York Times article about me. And so everyone's like, okay, Hitler, not that big of a deal. Yes, they did just invade the Sudetenland. And we had to appease them. But no, it's good now. We're good. Peace in our time is what they were all saying. And the New York Times was like, yep, this is a good deal for everybody. It's peace in our time. Definitely nothing else is going to come of this. Until on a cold, dark night in I forgot the date, 38, 39, something like that. I'm going to say 1939. On a cold, dark night in 1939, some sneaky, mean, no good, rotten, up to just villainy, really. Some stinky Polish, some really bad guys who were almost definitely, well, let's not just say almost definitely, because this is the New York Times. We got to get it right. They were absolutely, definitely Polish military people and not Germans dressed up as Polish people who then go and shoot prisoners dressed up as German soldiers in a Nazi op called Operation Canned Goods, which, gross, right? Cringe. Nazis, right? Cringe. You don't call it Operation Canned Goods when you're murdering prisoners that you're pretending are your soldiers while your soldiers are actually dressed up as Polish soldiers. And then the New York Times goes, oh no, can you believe it? Entire world. Poland just invaded Germany. And Poland's like, what the crap? We obviously would not do that. They're crazy over there. Hitler's obviously a huge danger to us. And Hitler was like, no, it is with great sorrow that I must declare that in self-defense, we're going to launch the massive, massive army that we have at the border right now, just coincidentally, into Poland and blitzkrieg them and slaughter them and set up a ghetto in Warsaw and start just slaughtering Jews. Right. We have to do that. It's self-defense. And the New York Times is like, well, in fairness, it is self-defense. Right. I know that it looks like there's a lot of atrocities happening here. And yes, they did invade the entire country and topple the entire government and slaughter the entire army and blitz through the entire countryside and ravage and rape and pillage and destroy. But you see, definitely 6 or 7 Polish guys attacked a power station over the border in Germany. So this feels to us, the New York Times, like a proportionate response. And so we're going to publish that in our newspaper. And basically they just did this over and over and over again. And Joseph Goebbels, like the sinister, evil propaganda minister for Nazi Germany, he's basically doing backflips and like laughing and rubbing his hands because the New York Times, they're like just cribbing off of his notes and reprinting like Nazi propaganda in the New York Times in America over and over and over and over and over again, so that America is like, well, Germany's not that bad. Nazis apparently aren't that bad. The thing is, though, the thing that's crazy about this is that the author, Mr. Rinsberg, talks about how the New York Times they're the only ones, the only paper in America that's doing this for some reason. All the other papers are like, yeah, obviously Nazis are bad, and obviously Hitler is evil, and obviously what they're doing to the Polish people right now is sinister and horrific, and obviously they're doing it on false pretenses. But the New York Times is like, no, we're going to take them at their word on this one. They seem like really good guys to us. Anyways, kind of another thing that pops up regularly throughout the book is that the New York Times has just like this really uncomfortable habit of engaging in like Holocaust denial and basic like anti-Semitic, like basically if there's if a story that involves the Jews and somebody else, the New York Times is going to be on the side of somebody else. And I don't know why they always do that. The owners of the New York Times are at least ethnically Jewish. And so it's strange that the New York Times has always taken this position of basically like, if there's a conflict and it involves the Jews, it's definitely the Jews' fault. And I don't know if they're just trying to like cover their own butts, or they feel like they're the only way for them to be unbiased or to seem unbiased is for them to like actively root for Holocaust. I don't know why they have done that, but they have done that. And it's a bummer that they do that. I mean, even to this day, right? You look at the way they cover conflicts in the Middle East that involve Israel, and it's always that Israel is a bunch of like warmongering baby murderers, and everyone else there is just a bunch of like sweet, innocent people who just want to live their best lives. And, if it weren't for all of the Jews, then the world would be the Middle East would be a peaceful place, right? That's kind of the New York Times hot take on this, and it turns out they've been doing that for like 100 years now. So no surprises. If you're reading a story that talks about Israel now, I would not, if I were you, get my information from the New York Times. They have a pretty dependable track record when it comes to covering anything that has to do with Jewish people. So maybe steer clear on that and get your information elsewhere. Another interesting thing that they do is has to do with communists. And, I'm not going to like be like, oh, those darn commies, blah, 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 but like whatever, even though I do think those darn commies and whatever. But the New York Times, they have never met a communist dictator that they didn't love, right? And so one of the things that they've been criticized over heavily is the famine in Ukraine, right? And to set it up, let me just tell you a story. And, a quick history lesson, kids, for those of you out there who are still laboring under the delusion that communism is anything other than the most hideous, evil, possible way to run a society ever devised by mankind. Let me just tell you about the famine in Ukraine. So in like 19 or like 18 even 90s, early 1900s, so right at the turn of the 20th century there, the Russian serfs, the serfs of the Russian Empire, I guess, are liberated. They're freed. They get to be people instead of chattel, which chattel is goods or whatever. That's the legal term for that. But they're people instead of chattel. And so now they can own land, but the land is kind of divided evenly up like among all of the serfs, and they get to kind of have a go at it. But because people are not equal and not equally gifted and not equally hardworking and not equally talented and not even equally lucky, there quickly becomes this sort of disparity between the groups of serfs, and then some of them start to do really, really well for themselves, and they have some good harvests and they make some good decisions, and they're lucky to be born with 7 healthy sons that can work the farm for them, and they gradually, slowly but surely, over a couple of generations, become fabulously wealthy relative to the other serfs around them, because they've had a run of good luck, they've had a run of hard work, they've had a run of good fortune, they've had a run of maybe their neighbors have had some poor fortune. Whatever it is, good rain. I don't know. Life is funny that way. Nothing is fair, no matter how much, no matter what lies your sociology professor tells you or whatever. Like, life is never going to be fair and equal. It can't be done. The rain falls where it will, whether you want it to fall on you or not. Right. So anyways, this group of farmers that does well for themselves, they kind of start to be recognized as sort of a force in the region, and they are just hyper successful relative to their peers. They're able to start employing their peers, and the system's working really well. These people are called the kulaks, and they're providing just huge quantities of food for all of Russia and Ukraine and the whole area in there, in East Europe, right? And the communist revolution happens. Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, all these super wonderful people you've heard about in your history book who would never do anything wrong to anybody, because they're just all about brotherly love and comrades and communist utopia and all that stuff. Anyways, all these loving, kind, gentle people take over, and quickly they say, actually, you know what? All of you raggedy peasants who are super sad right now, turns out actually the only reason you're not rich is because the kulaks, those guys over there, they actually took that from you. It's actually pretty savage of them if you think about it. So anyways, if you wanted to go and like rape their daughters and slaughter them and take all their stuff, that would be really, really dope, and definitely fair. And so that's what they did. There was a mass raping and slaughtering and persecution of the kulaks. And really quickly, Ukraine was left with just all of the people who were garbage at farming to run all of the farms. And then Lenin and Trotsky and Stalin and friends, they decided, you know what would be a really good idea is if we would all work the land together in like a communal kind of way, then we could all benefit from the produce of our labors. But then they had already killed all of the good farmers by then. So really they just had a bunch of like lazy, not good farmers who are mostly good at raping and killing and complaining. Those guys took over the farms, and actually, it's crazy. It's actually kind of crazy that this happened, but they didn't do a good job of farming. And so millions and millions of people started to starve to death, because turns out you actually need farming to make food, and you actually need food to live. And that's, in fairness to the communists, there's no way that they could have known that. There's no way that they could have known that slaughtering all of the productive people in their society who make all of the food for their society, there's no way they could have known that that would backfire. Right. In fairness to them. And the New York Times, in fairness to them, didn't even check. Didn't even ask. In fact, they were so enamored with the revolution, as they were calling it back then, this utopian experiment. They thought it was such a wonderful, beautiful thing. And oh, wow, if we could only have that here, we could sure knock those fat cats off their pedestals in America. If only we could have that here. But then once the reports of, millions and millions and millions of people starving to death started to reach the local reporter, whose name was Walter Duranty, very famous reporter, he was like, nah, probably not true. I'll go directly to like friggin' Pravda, the communist state paper or whatever. I'm not actually sure if it's called Pravda. Maybe I might have beefed there. But anyways, they go to basically the propaganda outlet, as they're wont to do. They learned that from the Nazi era. And so they go to the communists' propaganda arm and say, hey, how's things going? And the communists are like, yes, good, comrade. Everything is wonderful and good and fine. Definitely not millions of people starving to death around here, for sure. And so that's what Walter Duranty published. He said, no, for sure, there are definitely not millions of people starving. That's a lie made up by capitalists to sell more. I don't know. I don't even know what the accusation would be. Basically, though, he said the communists did nothing wrong. There's no one starving. Everyone here is fat and happy and getting along just fine. Thank you very much. The revolution is on target, right? He wins a Pulitzer Prize for his efforts, for that majestic piece of reporting. And the New York Times, to this day, is still holding on to that Pulitzer Prize, even though, I think 30 million Ukrainians, maybe not that many, but millions and millions, right? It's beyond even what you could comprehend, the amount of human suffering that was caused by this horrible, stupid idea, right? And the New York Times was like, you know what? In order to protect this horrible, stupid idea from scrutiny, we're going to pretend that the consequences of this horrible, stupid idea don't exist. And then everyone, even into the 21st century, will be like, yeah, communism, maybe we'll give it a try. Maybe it'll work. Maybe if we just slaughter all the productive people and have all the not productive people take over those jobs and share those jobs equally, we'll be able to share all of the productivity that won't be there anymore. But it'll be new productivity, definitely as good or better. And there won't be any greedy people to take it. So we'll all get it and we'll all live happily ever after. It doesn't work, kids. I'm sorry to report this to you. It doesn't work. It hasn't worked. It will never work. Anyone who tells you, oh, well, that's not real communism that they tried. That's because communism, that's literally like seeing somebody tape a horn to a donkey, and then the donkey kills 30 million Ukrainians. And then they say, well, that's not a real unicorn. Right. Because unicorns don't exist. And when I don't even know what this metaphor is. This metaphor fell apart really badly. What I'm trying to tell you is that regardless of what people tell you, it doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because life's not fair. Life's not equal. The rain falls where it falls, and people are lucky. People are unlucky. People are born with strong, like strapping sons, and other people are born with no children, or they have no children born to them, and they're not able to work the farms as efficiently. And life is just not fair that way, right? People are born different. Some people are born really, really good looking, and so they get to go and work in Hollywood and not actually have to do anything for a living except for just like take their shirt off and whatever, right? Like other people, no matter how hard you work, you're just never going to catch a break. Even if you are an awesome, good person. Like I know lots of people who work super hard and have worked super hard their entire lives, but just never caught a break, right? That can happen. Life's not fair. But you can't really make it fair. And every time someone has tried, it has resulted in death and disaster. That's not me saying that we shouldn't help poor people. That's like the opposite of what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that every time that you try to create class warfare, like Karl Marx kind of did, and like Lenin and Trotsky and Stalin kind of leaned into, every time that's been done and people start killing each other over unfair distribution of resources, it always results in famine and death and destruction. It's just a bad idea. It's just like, let's not do it again. Anyways, this has been my rant on communism, but let's not stop there. Let's move on over to Fidel Castro, the communist dictator of Cuba, who through a revolution, and the revolution failed badly. He ends up running away into the mountains with like 18 followers, and it's over for him. There's just no way that he's going to be king of Cuba anymore. His dreams are over until some plucky young New York Times reporter finds him up in the mountains and is like, wow, this guy, he is charismatic. And I have heard really, really good things about communism from my buddy Walter Durante. And so, maybe we should write a paper about how handsome and charming and good and benevolent Fidel Castro is. And he did that. And the American public started, like some people in America, particularly on the American left, no shade being thrown here, but, we'll call a spade a spade. A lot of people in America on the American left started saying, we should really support this communist revolution in Cuba. It would be a good thing for the workers of Cuba to have a communist government that would represent them well. There's definitely nothing that could go wrong. You've heard about how good it's going in Ukraine. Everyone's fat and happy there. You heard it. You read it, right? In the New York Times. It was in the New York Times, you guys. So anyway, they start sending money over to Castro. And Castro uses the money to build an army, and then the army takes over Cuba, and Castro proceeds to be another hideous dictator who slaughters his people and brutalizes them and terrorizes them for Castro lived for like 1,000 years. He died what was that, like 3 years ago? If that. Castro lived a long, long time, and a lot of people suffered because the New York Times didn't want to see him lose his war. So anyways, that happened as well. And I guess let me just wrap up with this one last story kind of here, because I feel like I've done a lot of ranting on this one. Part of the reason that I've ranted on this is because every time I was reading these stories, I was like, I knew it. I knew they were in on it, because I've always been like, how did people make such bad choices throughout history? How did people not see that things were going badly? How did people not tell that the Nazis were evil? How did people not tell that Stalin and the communists and Mao and Castro were evil and doing evil things to their people, like slaughtering literally millions of them, like hundreds? Communism has killed, I don't even know. You may remember this from Red Roulette, but like the estimates are like over 100 million people at this point have died. The Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, another good example of like they just went and they slaughtered everyone who could read, right? That's where they drew the line for their communist revolution is, it's the people who can read. That's the reason why we aren't all super rich and fabulously, enjoying our lives. So they went around and slaughtered everyone who had glasses, because the implication was, you use those glasses to read, right? Anyone they could find who was even like slightly educated, they slaughtered them. And guess what happened to their economy, right? Guess what happened to their productivity? Obviously, it went into the pooper. So what I'm saying is, communism, not smart. Don't try it. Don't advocate for it. But also, New York Times, shame on you. right? And so let's leave the communism here, and we'll talk about another big issue that the New York Times wanted to talk about. This one is the Israel-Palestine conflict, and I'm not going to give you the huge history lesson here. It's safe to say that after World War II, the British were in control of the area in the Middle East called Palestine. It's where Israel is now. That's where like the Holy Land is, the Temple on the Mount, Dome of the Rock, all this stuff, all these holy sites for three of the world's major religions: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. And so Britain is like, the Holocaust was really a bad deal. So we're going to take all the Jews and we're going to give them Israel, their original homeland from back in like the Roman times. They get to have this now, and they're going to go back and they're going to form a Jewish state, and they can do their own thing and no one will bother them. Anyways, there were obviously, because these were holy sites, there were obviously people living there. So Britain kind of has to roust the local population to make room for the Jewish population. They try to do it. I mean, they pretend like they're trying to do it fairly, but like, I love Britain and I love the British, but I'm not going to do too much to pretend like they're good to the places that they conquer. Because as a general rule, the British are not great to the people that they conquer. The people of their empire have not. I mean, you might be able to argue like that some of these places are a little better off for having been part of the empire. That said, the vast majority of their subjects, particularly if they were of a different race, those people, I don't think the individuals would view themselves as having been really well taken care of and well handled. And so, yeah, maybe you can argue that, India is more powerful economically than it would have been now, but there was just way too much suffering along the way to justify that. So anyways, the state of Israel is born under these kind of, they are tricky circumstances, right? But to Israel's credit, right off the bat, they're like, yes, this is going to be a Jewish state, but everyone is welcome here. We're going to be nice to Muslims and everything like that. And they did. I don't think I also don't want to pretend like they did a great job of that either, right? Like, people are fallible, people make mistakes, and they weren't super kind to the Palestinian locals. However, as the conflict starts to like heat up between the people who are being moved and the Jewish people, and then all the rest of the Middle East gets involved, and they declare jihads. There's a 6-day war. They're attacking the Jews on like their holy festivals, the Yom Kippur and everything like that. There's all these wars. And like I said, I'm not going to go into too much detail about this. You can read about it yourself if you want to. Anyways, the Middle East all attack Israel, and Israel fights back, and Israel kicks their butt really badly. Anyways, long story short, there's this tense kind of ceasefire situation where there are Palestinians who are like local Muslim people in Israel, the territory that was given to Israel by Britain, and Israel. They're just trying to run their lives. They have a really, really strong military presence there. They have to, right? Because all of the countries around them want them to be wiped off of the map, right? They always talk about like driving Israel and all of the Jews into the sea and slaughtering them. And that's like, they're really, really open about that being their goal. Anyways, so there's this ethnic conflict, but the Jews in Israel, I should say the Israelis at this point, right? Because not all of them are Jewish, but the Israelis, they are trying to be inclusive. They're trying to allow Muslim people to see their holy sites. They're even making all kinds of accommodations to make it so that like the Jews can't visit these holy sites because they're, I guess, more holy to the Muslims or something like that. I don't know the exact details. But anyways, there's these conflicts that are erupting. The New York Times is covering them, and their coverage is just scathing on the Israelis. They really, really, really cannot stand the Israelis in this situation, and so they're just every time there's an opportunity for them to pretend like Israel is the bad guy, they do. And there's this famous shooting of a Palestinian boy that was definitely staged by the Palestinians, right? A bunch of French experts weighed in on it, and they're like, the Israelis couldn't have shot him. It's not possible from where they were located. He was definitely shot by someone who was behind him. All this stuff. Anyways, it becomes this rallying cry for all these jihadis. There's suicide bombings. Even Osama bin Laden uses this boy's name as a rallying cry. And there's this one picture that's a picture of a Israeli police officer. He's in full riot gear, and he's standing behind and above a man who is crouched down, and the man is obviously beaten up and dusty and bleeding, and the Israeli guard has his arm raised, and he's got a baton in his arm. And the New York Times posts this picture and says, Israeli police beat Palestinians on the Temple Mount. And there's a couple of things wrong with that. First of all, there's a gas station in the background, and I don't feel like I have to explain this to you about like the holiest site in 3 major religions. There is not a gas station on it, turns out. Turns out that this photo was taken somewhere else, and it was also taken of someone else. Actually, the cowering man who's bloodied and beaten up and dusty, he's actually a Jewish person. And the Jewish guard who's behind him, the Israeli guard who's behind him, he is brandishing his baton at a group of Palestinians who were lynching the man when the guard showed up and drove them off. And so the New York Times, not only did they take this picture out of context, they took the exact opposite context, and they took the picture. This was their picture that their reporter took, and they lied. They lied so hard on it to try and like gin up more conflict in this already precarious situation. So, and they have kind of a habit of doing this. Obviously, it's in their interest to sell the news. And so they make the news, if there is no news, then they make the news. And if the Jews are involved, then whoever is the other guy is the good guy and the Jews are the bad guy. That's the New York Times hot take on basically everything. I'm not even going to try to pretend to be impartial about this. The New York Times is garbage. It's hot, steamy, stinky garbage, and you shouldn't read it. And they lie about everything. I just read an article today, and I'm not going to go into this because it's too hot right now. I don't want you guys to be like, oh, well, Tom's political. I'm not going to listen to his thing anymore because he disagrees with me politically. If you do disagree with me politically, please feel free to do so, right? I will appreciate intellectual honesty in all forms. And so if you disagree with me, I could be wrong. I could very easily be wrong. And I'm willing to accept that. But the New York Times posted an article that I read. They posted it this week where they just lied about something. They lied about a trial that I watched. I watched the trial myself, every minute of it, because I'm interested in it, right? I'm a law student. I'm interested in this trial. I watched every second of it. I'm like, oh man, I wonder what the coverage is like. And so I typed it in. I searched for it. The New York Times article popped up. They said the exact opposite of the thing that was true. There was this huge bombshell development in the testimony of the case, and the New York Times said the exact opposite. And I'm like, are you just trying to trick people? And obviously they're able to trick people because no one's actually watching the trial. They're just listening to what the New York Times says about it. So I think they're investing in a riot when this case eventually reaches its terminus. It's basically a sure thing how this case is going to end now. But the New York Times has portrayed it as like the only way that the verdict couldn't go in their favor is if there was some like crazy scandal or corruption or the judge was corrupt or something. When in reality, the witnesses, even the prosecution's witnesses, were in favor of the defense. This case is over, but the Times is lying about it. So I'm frustrated with them right now, if you can't tell. And so maybe I should have let myself cool off a little bit before I recorded this podcast. But hey, maybe you'll just get a ranty episode of What's Tom Reading. Anyways, I'm going to take a deep breath. We're going to go over to the science corner. Here we go. All right, welcome to the science corner. So I ran a little bit long in the main section, but I've got to hustle through these. But this one I think is definitely something worth knowing. So as I was reading through this book about the New York Times, Gray Lady Winked, I thought, wow, why is it that bad news seems to hit so hard and people seem to care so much more about it than good news, right? Because there are a lot of cool, good things that happen every day. Like people are actually pretty good to each other, it turns out, but it doesn't really make the news as a general rule. So like, that's how you know, right? That the news is, there's a disconnect between what's the news and what's reality. Because if the news were the way that the world was, then we wouldn't be able to leave our houses, man. Like the world would be it would be a pit, right? It'd be the worst place. My neighbors are actually pretty good people, turns out. And, I think your neighbors probably are too. The world's actually a pretty good place. Anyways, So I got doing some research on it, and I learned about this thing. It's called negativity bias, and it's a psychological phenomenon that's pretty well studied through all different kinds of cultures and large sample sizes. And so it seems pretty definitive at this point. But basically, we are hardwired in our brains to pay more attention to things that are negative than to things that are positive, right? And they tested this with like different, I don't know, like check how people's palms sweated and pupils dilated, or whatever stage of arousal they got into when they read various pages of news. I read the methods on it. I didn't find it that fascinating, but when you read a study, kids, it's important for you to check the methods section on it, so that you see and check the sample size and check the p-values and all the stuff that you should learn about statistics before you really try to make a claim, yay or nay on science. But anyways, this seems pretty sound to me. I'm not positive about it. It's not like I'd bet my life on it. But basically, the running theory is that we pay more attention to negative things because our evolutionary ancestors, right? They were more likely to survive if they were like, oh man, was that a leopard? Holy cow. Versus like, oh wow, what a beautiful flower. And then a leopard ganks them, right? So basically, it basically says that we're hardwired. That's the running theory. But whatever it is, bad news travels way faster, way further, gets way more traction than good news does. And that is one of the big things that newspapers like the New York Times are making their business model off of. Please bear that in mind. Okay, let's head over to the History Corner. Okay, welcome to the History Corner. In spirit of the general theme of this episode, I wanted to talk about something called Potemkin Villages. And if you haven't heard that phrase before, basically what it is it's like a big fake town that communist countries tend to make so that they can have Western idiots like academics and reporters from the New York Times and people like that come and take a tour through their grocery stores and like their, they have like these starved, emaciated people that are all like, they're like, pretend you're having fun or you'll be shot. When those Americans get here, you better look like you're having the time of your life. They're like, please just feed us. And they're like, no, maybe we'll talk after. And they say, oh, you always say that. Anyways, these Potemkin villages are set up with like literally they're like fake grocery stores, right? Like they have like there's nothing behind them. Nobody actually lives there. Nobody actually lives that way. They like hire people to drive around cars and to look super happy and prosperous, even though that's not the way that the actual country is. And reporters and intellectuals and academics come over from the West and visit it. And, oh wow, the experiment is going just as planned. The utopia is really coming along. Oh man, I wish we had something like this back home. And the communists go, yep, for sure. And then if one of the actors steps out of line, they're quietly shoveled off to the basement and shot. But anyways, then the Westerners head back to their own countries and report on how wonderful things are going in Soviet Russia or communist China or North Korea or any of the other places. You know how a place is not good? It's that you have to make up a place that is not your place to show all the other people in the world and pretend like that's your place. That's how you know that your system is not good. Now, granted, in fairness, to give the devil his due on this one, it's not like we would take visiting, dignitaries to Detroit, Michigan or something like that. If they were visiting America, we wouldn't want to give them that flavor of, our country necessarily. No offense to anyone who's in Detroit, but like, we would probably want to send them somewhere nice too here. But like the idea with the Potemkin villages is that there's this glaring inconsistency between them. Anyways, that happened. It does happen. It's something we should be aware of, right? Obviously. This has been the History Corner. Let's head to the Random Corner for one last knock on communism. Did you know that if you wanted to visit Karl Marx's grave, it would cost you $6? How's that? For capitalism. Anyways, this has been the Random Corner. Back to the main review. All right, so we are in the stuff I didn't like section of the book, and we're pretty much out of time for this episode. So what I'm going to say is I didn't like how the New York Times has been lying to everyone for 100 years about the worst people in the world and the worst atrocities in history. Didn't like that. I liked learning about it. I appreciate the book. I thought the book was excellently written. Obviously, the author has some kind of an axe to grind. I'm willing to admit that, right? And before you get to say like, oh, wow, Tom just went off on communism today. What does he know about it? I have a full college degree in it. My undergraduate degree is in sociology. I've read Marx, Engels, Durkheim, all of the big sociological thinkers. I'm well versed in all forms of conflict theory, critical race theory, critical feminist theory. I'm there with you on all of it. But communism, not a good idea. Communism as has been tried, communism as other people theorize might be tried. Just maybe don't do it, right? When something kills hundreds of millions of people, you want to try to steer away from it as a general rule. That's kind of my position on it. So that said, let's give this thing the quick rating of the bells here. That's right. 4-star book. Good book. Not the best book in the world. 4 stars. I thought it was very educational. I thought it was very informative. You should definitely go out and pick it up. Again, thank you so much for your support. If you decide you do want this book, please use the link in the description to go out and get it yourself. I didn't cover every story. There are plenty more that I didn't touch on that are just as interesting and horrific and fascinating and wild. You definitely want to know this, especially if you're an avid reader of the New York Times. It would be good for you to be able to see the different times that your beloved paper has not quite nailed it. If you're interested in intellectual honesty, right, then you should want to know those things. If you hate the New York Times, then you'll probably like this too, because it's a nice dish session. Either way, I think you'll really get a kick out of this, whoever you are, if you're interested in news and politics and the way that the printed word in the United States has impacted history, and to pretend like there hasn't been some serious consequences for the words that have been printed in the New York Times. I think you have to be mad to think that. So, and one last thing, quick little update on Lily, the giant water bug. She's still alive. She's doing just fine. I fed her a couple of goldfish yesterday. That's horrific. They're now hollowed out and floating in the bottom of her little tank. But yeah, Lily's still here. I had a couple of people ask me about Lily. So let's move on to the parting thought. And I'm sorry today if I dumped all over an ideology that you're fond of. I don't want you to feel like you come to my podcast and I say mean things about the things that you like. So I realized that I might have gotten a little carried away with my opinions on this. It's just a little bit of a touchy subject for me right now, because I feel like if there were just a little bit more honesty going around in the world, there would be a lot less pain. And I get that pain sells. And I get that, with negativity bias and all this stuff, I get that the New York Times, they're trying to make a profit, right? They're a very, 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 very wealthy organization, and they want to keep it that way. And so, they'll say what they have to say to move papers, right? But a little more honesty, I think, would go a long way. I'm frustrated. I'm sure you can tell that. I'm sure, you're frustrated either with the New York Times or with, some other organization that you view as having a similar role. And there are plenty of them, right? I'm not going to pretend like this is just an issue of one team. And I'm not on any team here. I'm just, I think people should just tell the truth, right? And the world will be a better place. And don't keep trying to do communism, because it just freaking doesn't work. Maybe it would be nice if it did work. I don't know. I personally don't see that it would be super nice for us all to wear the same clothes and eat the same food. Variety is nice, and people are different, and people have different abilities and wants and dreams and desires. And having the government's bad at everything. Having them be in charge of everything that you do, come on. We can do better than that for sure. So anyways, that leads me to today's parting thought. And it's from a great man, Martin Luther King Jr., who I had the privilege recently of writing a massive, massive paper in law school on. And I read basically all of his speeches, all of his public speeches. I read his compiled autobiography. It's basically his journals and things that were posthumously put together. Anyways, an awesome guy, awesome character. You should definitely, I know the FBI did some stuff to kind of smear him as time went on, but that's neither here nor there for me. Great men, make mistakes as well. But Martin Luther King, I think, inarguably is a great, great man who has had a great impact on the course of the modern country of the United States. And so, and the world for that matter. But this is what he says. And this is what he said in a speech that I read of his that was kind of talking about communism, because during the civil rights era, there was a certain branch of the movement, like the Malcolm X's and stuff like that. They were really, really big on like, we got to tear down the systems and rebuild them all from scratch because, down with, the bourgeoisie and whatnot. Right. But Martin Luther King said, quote, "Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred." End quote. And that I think is important, right? If your ideal world involves killing people who you don't know and taking away their stuff and raping their daughters and whatever, right? Like what the Russians and Ukrainians did with the kulaks, right? Or, what slaughtering people who can read, like the Khmer Rouge did in Cambodia, right? Like if your worldview involves bitterness and hatred of a group that you think is responsible for your personal ills or whatever, I want to strongly caution you that you are definitely on the wrong side of history here, right? Kristallnacht, the Holocaust, pogroms, the starvation in Ukraine, mass starvation with Mao's Great Leap Forward, the slaughtering of intellectuals in Cambodia, the absolute massive, hideous evils that have been done in the name of this idea that somebody else is holding you down. And if only they were gone and out of the way. It's poison. Get it out of your system, get it out of your blood, whatever you have to do. Just get it out of there. This, I hate to feel like I'm preaching to you guys on this show, especially because I came here to talk about a book. But man, if I have one voice and I reach, a couple hundred people, then I want you guys to hear from me. I think it's a really bad idea. And I think we should be kind to each other. We should definitely not be heading full speed into ideologies that involve scapegoating any group of people, no matter how powerful or influential that group of people are. Don't scapegoat them. Don't get into a position where we're going to be doing what people have already done throughout history during these revolutions. It's ugly. It's bad. It's not what will bring us happiness and peace. So that said, I'm going to wrap it up. Please try and have a good day. Hopefully I didn't bum you out too bad with this one. Pick up The Gray Lady Winked. It's an awesome book. Thank you guys so much. Have a nice day. You deserve it.